Among you, there are probably a lot of players who play the ready opening. It's a very popular choice and it's very flexible and versatile. Actually, I used to play it up until a few weeks ago, but the Dutch defense is always very annoying because you know what to do. Because like in a normal d4 gambit, opening, you would like to have the bishop on g5 immediately, or maybe a queen on d3, or the knight would go to h3. But obviously that is not that possible anymore because the knight is already on f3, or committed already to something. So in a way, it's not that flexible. So you have to choose another weapon. So in my opinion, the best weapon here is d3, no questions asked. Because usually in the Dutch, you love to get e4 in, because then the king is kind of weakened and black stops fighting for the center. And yeah, it's quite good. So if knight f6, trying to stop e4 by developing a piece, you play e4 anyways. You do not care at all. They can take, it just does not matter. Like knight goes to f6 and knight g5. Looks like a very weird move, but the simple idea is just to sack the knight or the bishop on h7. And then you can already see the weakness of this king here. Like if h6, there's this checkmate. Also a nice trap. So they have to play g6 here, essentially. Like this is the only move to not lose immediately. So now h4. Again, h5, hangs mate. So, I don't know, let's say d5. But after d5, simply h5 immediately. With the wholehearted idea that if the knight takes, you sack. If the pawn takes, you take here. Like that would look like this. And now simply actually bishop h7 is even much better, because now you go in and now you go back for this threat. And this line does not need more coverage because it is simply completely losing after knight to g5. You could play knight to c3 here, but there's just no need for you to play so passively. So what should they do instead of playing knight f6 then? Well, they should play d6, knight c6, or d5. Let's start with d6. Well, against d6, you play e4. Now e5 is the best move. And first you start with knight to c3, but now with knight to c6, you do something that kind of looks a bit weird. You take on f5. I mean, you might say, oh, I'm developing the bishop. How can this be good? Well, you play d4 now. And this looks extra weird, but hanging with me here. If e4, that's a terrible move. Absolutely terrible, because of d5, which again looks completely brain dead. But takes, and if they try to take here, simply bishop g2 and he's cooked, because now he can't take back, and if b6, now he's a pawn wedge stuck in here. So he already has to be careful, so he probably has to take back here, and now after simply queen to f3, this king is super weak, and white is getting some nice development here. So always not e4 then, so what should you play? Well, taking, you might think is an option. It really isn't. Like knight takes, and knight takes here is the best move, and only move that doesn't just immediately lose the game, basically. Queen takes, obviously. And now queen f6, c6, or I mean knight f6 is probably going to be a move that is played quite often in practical games. I've not had this position before, I have to be honest, but there were four simply. And I mean, you can simply develop bishop b5 is a move you often play, kind of bait out c6, knight to c6, and then move with your central pawns. Since you don't have central pawns, you don't do this here. And you might notice that c2 is hanging, which I can take. It's a totally fine move, but simply bishop c4. And you can already see, like, black is lacking behind the development. Like, I'm about to castle, and I'm gonna play rook e1 check, and you are about to get cooked. Good sir. Like, with these rooks here, your king is about to be cooked, and you're not castling kingside either. And you're not castling queenside either, because I have all of this firepower here right in your face. So there's really not much you can do here, except play the top engine move, which is c6, which is like, I think it's just a weird move. Here, bishop f4, again you can play, but a very nice move, g4. G4 is just looks amazing, like doesn't just look cool. Bishop c2 now. Again, kind of reminiscent of the Dingley Ren World Championship game where you had the bishop on c2. If you remember, shout out, I guess. Bishop g2. This bishop isn't really looking at much if d5, for example. But yeah, that does not bother you. Simply castles. d5 is a waste of time. Doing this twice, dancing around the pawn, because now you get this in and the king is cooked. And black is going to end up losing almost. So d5 definitely not. He has to play very precisely here and try to trade off the queens. That is the best approach. Obviously, you cannot take under any circumstances here. So you go queen to c4. Now d5, I guess, makes sense, but now knight takes d5. This is not some crazy tactic. It is simply because the bishop on c2 is hanging. And this is the whole idea, is just black just has a worse position like this. And this isn't by any means winning by white. It's definitely way better, and you should probably win this. But black has some tricks. For example, the king is looking kind of weak. And maybe if you get some play here, like this could be kind of dicey though. But that's probably not going to happen because you're just winning this pawn, and you do actually just have better pieces at the end of the day, and you're going to get some space and this, and you're going to win this game, trust me. So after all this, what should black do? Well, in this position, maybe just not even play knight c6. You can play knight f6 here, but it definitely just is almost the same, like this. Yeah, now knight c6, and this is just the same if you play knight c6, knight f6, but now bishop to b5. Again, e4 is now not possible at all, so now you can actually kind of take. Knight takes, and bishop to d7. This looks good, looks like black isn't in no trouble whatsoever. Knight takes c6. It's not that good of a move, but you have to play bishop takes c6. If bishop takes c6, which looks just completely natural, simply castles. And this is coming. So you should not move the bishop a second time. You should indeed capture with the pawn, which is for some reason a bit better. I don't quite know why, but d5 here is the best move. Yeah, I mean, just rook e1, king to f7, and black would love to get something like this, you know what I mean? Like h5, h4, and then put the rook like this, because in another way, like, he's not getting the rook out. I guess he could go to g6, but yeah. So yeah, let's look at another line instead of this d6 line, which is something like knight to c6 right here, knight to c6, but this line doesn't take too much looking at. You have to know this move though, which is d4, looking very counterproductive. Moving the pawn 2 times, could have just moved it 1 time, you stupid idiot. e6. Yeah, the point of this is, honestly, I'm not quite sure, but it is good this way. I guess the point is you don't really want the knight on c6 anyway. It's kind of like in the Catalan where you move the bishop twice. I guess, yeah, I mean, this structure is, I guess, not ideal with this. And now you just kind of play like a Catalan, but the knight is on c6. So that means now your bishop is going to get strong and you're going to chip at the center like this. Not much to explain here. I think you got the plans. So yeah, what if d5? You're thinking, yeah, he wants to play e4, so I just completely not let that happen. Well, you play c4 here. c4, the idea is not to go into an endgame and trade queens, because that is not that good. But instead, the idea is to play e4. Again, we've seen this idea before, and the idea is to play e3, not put the bishop out, but to play e3, knight c3, you want this, and then you're going to develop by your bishop by playing e4 eventually. You are going to get into a isolated queen's pawn position, but into a very favorable knight to c6 and knight f6. Let's first look at what happens if he tries to kind of hang on to the pawn with b5. That simply does not work. Like c6, I mean, simply takes, and now there's a simple move. You could play b3. I like knight c3. It doesn't really make a difference. Obviously, b4 is not really available. So bishop to d7 might come to mind. But here, an amazing move. I just love this move again. g4, holy. e6 has to be played because, like, if he takes simply knight e5, you might ask, why not just play knight e5 immediately? Well, you just simply can't, because the point of knight e5 is to play e4. And now the bishop is free as well, and this rook is trapped now. Look at this. Like, it's knight f6. Bing. Bong. It's trapped. This. Bing bong. Rook is again trapped. And there's just nothing he can do about it. That is why this b5 line is absolutely trash, because this rook actually gets cooked by the bishop, which is kind of fun. Do not play b5 here as black. Instead, you should maybe play knight f6. This looks good. Definitely a passable move, and you should not defend his bishop with b5, but with bishop to e6. That is the way to go. It doesn't matter if you play bishop e6 right away, or if you start with knight to f6. You're definitely a bit worse here, but as black. But if white plays it wrong, black could just retain the pawn and have a fine position with like a bishop that is just like anchored in here. So white kind of has to be a little bit careful. Bishop d5 here again can be played, but right now it doesn't really do anything. It just loses a pawn for a bit of development, I think. That is the point. No, it's like knight to c6. Yeah, for a bit of development. So I say just play knight to c6 here. But now simply bishop to e2. You can play knight to g2 and go for the pawn immediately, but this is just a bit more development friendly, so to say. Like castles, for example. Now here the best move is knight to b4. Queen to d6 also playable, but let's just look at knight to b4. Queen to a4 check, and knight to c6. The idea is just you don't want the queen on c2 because you want to play bishop d5, but you don't want f5 to be hanging. So in an ideal world for black, he would just repeat these moves until it's a draw. But you are not playing into black's ideal world. You are playing knight to c3. Now you may be wondering, why can't you take? Simply because of this. b5, and you are cooked. So knight to c3, b5, queen to c2, and it looks like you're just completely cooked here. But you are definitely not. Hold on. Knight to b4. Queen to d2. Do not go queen b1. Do not go queen b1. I just said keeping on f5 is important, but here not. Queen e2 is definitely better. Bishop d5. Alright, he doesn't care if you take, because then he gets a knight here, which looks kind of good for him, I guess. So b3 and e6. And after e6 he's kind of feeling well, but you take, and you even go for this like big trade-off here. Because you go bishop to a3. Bishop a3 looks like low-key risky, because this bishop is hanging. It looks like black can just play knight to d3 also. But this is not a good move. It looks like black is fine here, and just has a powerful knight here. But actually queen to c2 and like something like this and this. Yeah, knight d2, knight c4 is just coming, and black just has nothing here. So he should not fall into this trap right here. Instead he should probably play knight a5. Well, now queen to e2. This is kind of a structure and a pattern you see where you put the bishop on e3, you have a knight on c3 and a queen on e2. In another version of a Catalan, an open Catalan where black puts the knight on c6 and goes with like rook b8, b5, which is also similar to play like this. So that f to d5 here is the best move, just giving back the pawn. You can already see like black is not doing well at all. I wouldn't say his pieces are good. He has a backwards pawn. White has an uber solid pawn structure. His rooks are ready to come into the game. The c pawn is weak. A pawn is attackable. Knight b5, knight e5, and look at that. Even e4 pushes. And then this pawn is isolated. Even the king could get weak. Like in a potential world where this happens, or let's say this happens, like this king could even get weak. So black is not safe here at all. White is plus 0.5 and black is almost cooked. Like, honestly, okay. So that was about it. Every line in this opening, except one actually. So if c4, this, yeah. And now you see what is this opening. It is a ready, but a bad ready, because for some reason you have moved your f-pawn as black. So that doesn't quite make sense. And that is the reason why you can't just go on playing c5 and thinking you have a good position, because you are going to get slapped on the wrist for that. This pawn is now super weak. E5's never been played. G3, bishop G2, just normal development. Queen to C2, and just chill. Just have a normal game and destroy him. The king is weak, the pawns are weak. Just get him. It's not that hard. So maybe something else. C9 to C6, maybe. But also that is kind of to no avail. But at least for black, white has to be a little bit careful not to blunder his d-pawn right here. And he already has to give up the bishop here. But obviously black's not going to take it and waste another move with this knight. Yeah, white's just going to castle and now has a leading development. E6. And now you actually take only after e6. Because the point of this is now knight to c3, and now you actually need this bishop, because you played e6. Because the pawn is on the light square, and this bishop could be going to f3, and now with the rook on e1, this bishop could actually be overloaded, which is kind of fun to think about. So yeah, d4 is an absolute catastrophical mess for black, even though it doesn't look that way, but white is just going to get infinite development with bishop to e3 and stuff. And if I were dumb enough to play Dutch defense against ready, and walk into this line, I would play d5, obviously, because it is the best line in my opinion. But you know, you just sit back and wait for your eventual demise, or wait if white makes a mistake. So, you know, you can kind of choose black if you want a more, like a worse game, an objectively worse game. But, you know, I mean, white doesn't know as much about the position. Or maybe you have a bit more play. Or do you want an objectively better position, but you just are completely passive? And you're not that much better. So you kind of have to do that, but as white, I would be comfortable playing anything. That was it. Now, destroy every single Dutch defense you see.